This session is now being recorded, so welcome everybody to our webinar. I'm super excited to get to chat with Katy Milkman, author of How to Change. It's obviously in backwards. I'll have to reverse my camera. But I reached out. I saw this book come out. I can't remember if I heard you on a podcast first or not. Oh, I remember. Angela Duckworth wrote about this book in her newsletter that I read. I went and got the book. Then I reached out to her and said, would you make an introduction? And that's how we got to meet.
Which was such a treat. I'm so glad that we were connected by Angela. Thank you for your interest in the book.
And congrats on all your success. This book has really done well. You're a first-time author, and your book has come out into the world. You've been in the top 50 business books, I think, for the whole first month that you came out, it's a very tough market out there. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was a very exciting launch. I've learned so much, and yeah, thanks for the congratulations. It's been quite an adventure.
How many podcasts and shows do you think you've been on? Because it seems like I just turned on randomly, I think it was Freakonomics Radio, or maybe it was like the TED Talk Hour, and I'm like, I recognize that voice. I told my wife, and then finally I realized that it was you talking. You've really made the circuit, haven't you?
I have done the circuit. Yeah, I'm sure you've done. I'm sure over the course of your career, you've done all of the podcasts that I've done. But in the last 2 months, it has been a big circuit, and it's so interesting to launch a book in the middle, of course, of this very different era. Even though things are sort of going back to normal, there was no book tour. You know, I have signed something like 2 books total, and instead everything is done. Well, it's okay. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I didn't need the hand cramp anyway, and hopefully readers are getting just as much out of it even without a signed copy. But I have done a lot of podcasts. I think the week that the book launched, I was doing 4 or 5 a day. I lost my voice and I was gargling salt water between interviews. I was like, run down to the kitchen, gargle salt water. My husband looked at me like I was insane. Run back up and do the next one. So anyway, it was an endurance adventure, and as well as an adventure in other ways.
Oh, well, let's go back in time. I mean, you're primarily a researcher, right? So introduce everybody. I could read your bio, but you are a researcher, you're a professor, so you're a teacher, you're asking big questions, you're also trying to help your students answer them. How did this book, How to Change, come to life? Where does this come from?
Yeah, well, so as you said, I'm a professor at the Wharton School, and I co-direct an initiative there called the Behavior Change for Good initiative, along with Angela Duckworth. And really the book grew out of our work on that initiative, honestly. Grew out of my entire research career and all the things I've learned over the course of the time I've spent studying behavior change. But the initiative is when I became more laser focused, when we started that on change as a topic and as an area where I felt like I could make a contribution. My training is actually in computer science and business, which is funny because this book is a behavioral science book. It blends insights from psychology and economics, but that I teach a class at Wharton on managerial decision making, and my research has really veered strongly in the direction of behavioral science around behavior change. The reason for that, and which is also the impetus for writing the book, is that about a decade ago, when I was an assistant professor at Wharton, I started spending some time hanging out over at the medical school. We had a really great group of researchers over there who were interested in medical decision making. And I thought, these are people having a big impact, doing interesting work. It was aligned with some of my research interests. I'll see what they have to say. And during a seminar that I was attending there, I saw this graph. It was just a pie chart, and I write about this in the book. It absolutely blew my mind. It was a pie chart that broke down the causes of premature death in the U.S. And it showed, how many deaths are from accidents, how many are due to environmental factors, and so on. And what astounded me is the largest wedge in that pie chart was for premature deaths caused by behaviors we could change. 40% of premature deaths in the U.S. are due to decisions we make about what to eat, whether or not to drink and smoke, whether or not to be safe when we get into a vehicle, whether or not to be physically active. And I was just astounded by the magnitude of that. I always, of course, understood that our small choices can accumulate and that changing behavior for the better could matter, but I really didn't know how much. I would have said maybe 4% of premature deaths, not 40. And recognizing that accumulation, that opportunity for impact made me really shift gears. I had been, I would say, casually studying behavioral science and behavior change, doing a little bit of me search. Like I'd study something that I thought, oh, this kind of helped me. Maybe it would help other people. Let me see if I could document it. I became laser focused. And I don't just study health decisions. I also study decisions about finances and education, how to improve outcomes in those domains. And I've never seen a similar pie chart, but it's sort of easy to imagine how the same thing would be true. So that's the origin story. And then the book is just, I felt like I knew enough to write something that would be useful to people.
I love that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, your goal might be, the ultimate measure of your success with this book is like, it could be in lives saved someday, right? If we can look up.
I mean, that would be amazing if I could figure out how to quantify it. I would love that. It's funny, Angela and I actually have been talking about, and your book would be a good candidate for this too, by the way. It's really interesting. We do so much research and we pour ourselves often into writing these books that we hope will help improve people's lives, but there's not really any research on whether these kinds of books do improve lives. I think it would be really fascinating to do actual studies and see, can we document the benefits of reading these particular kinds of books that are really evidence-based and geared towards helping people make better decisions and have better outcomes.
There's a few, I can't remember the name, there's a podcast out there where each week they try to live a different kind of productivity or success book. So not research, but anecdotal. And wasn't the Happiness Project, I'm trying to think of the author's name, didn't she do that as well? She tried on different pursuits and tried, so like bringing a little rigor to something that people are already curious about. That would be really cool. So I'll definitely throw our hat in the ring if we need to do a research group. My aha.
Wonderful.
I shared with you once that I wrote, my co-author, we were writing a business book, right? We fundamentally were focused on how do we become more productive, and then we realized that approach was going to blossom into other areas. And the most feedback I've gotten from any audience has been around how they've applied a business book to their health. So I'll go back to your medicine and your experience in that ward or the hospital. I'm trying to imagine like you're just sitting there casually looking at some graph and then having this moment, this fork in the road for your life. But so much of the
it's
things
very nerdy.
Oh, it's awesome though. I love it. I got chill bumps when you shared that. Because you're tapping into purpose, which is a whole other conversation. Like, why do we choose to do hard things? Why do we choose to even pursue behavior change? Because it's not easy, right? There's a lot of work. Hopefully there's a big reason behind it. And for someone who's primarily in computers and research and business decisions, to go down a path that leads you to be gargling salt water like you're an opera singer, I'm sure you never imagined that. I'm sure I can't even imagine the mental gymnastics. Standing in front of a class and standing in front of a national stage are different things. So I'll just applaud you. I know that you had to make some major adjustments, but I do think that health, we get really great feedback. So I do think that's one of the reasons that behavior change there, 8 or 9 weeks, which feels like a long time, but is relatively short. You can get a great feedback loop on your exercise habit or your diet habit. You start to see results and others start to see them too. And I'll just be honest with you, where I want to go deep with you, you've got, I think, 8 chapters. You can't see it. I've got so many notes. I write down page numbers in the opening page, and so I can quickly go back and find all of my favorite spots in a book. But you've got 7 chapters. And you've addressed different things, but the theme I wanted to pull through, our audience, a lot of them, we do a thing called a 66-day challenge. And I acknowledge to you that 66 is just an average. It's not a magic number. It's like the 10,000 hour rule. It represents a journey you take to acquire a new habit, but it's a part of our culture. And I kept having all of these ahas about if you're seeking behavior change, right? That there are good ways to approach it and bad ways to approach it. And you've got some really fantastic insights. So with your permission, I'm just going to throw a few, hopefully they're softballs, right down the middle for you to knock out of the park. But I want to tap into some of the ideas that you, pretty much state are research facts that we can tap into when we go on this journey. Is that okay with you?
That sounds tremendously fun. I'm excited.
Okay, awesome. So, and I'll encourage our audience. I know we had over 1,200 people, I think, register for this, and a lot of them will watch it. It'll be recorded and sent to them. We have about, I don't know, roughly about 300 with us right now live. If you've got questions, use the chat and the questions. Kaylin, who you heard at the beginning, she's going to be serving up questions to me on the side, and I'll try to make sure we have some time before the end of our time here today to direct some of your questions right at Katy. So first and foremost, let's talk about, I'm trying not to follow the order of the book. I'm going straight to Andre Agassi, which I'm not going to do. We can do that later. But fresh starts. So my wife and I are 16 weeks into a massive lifestyle change. I shared with you, we really tried to change our diet. We added, like a lot of folks, we added a lot of unwanted pounds during COVID. And we decided that coming out of COVID, we were going to make massive lifestyle change, like how much we would allow ourselves to drink socially or at home, how much chocolate we would have while streaming Netflix, and also just basically re-engineering our meals. And I think we started looking to food as more of a comfort and a security blanket that it needed to be for our lives, and that was having health consequences. And I hypothesized in your book, I was like, oh my gosh, we're on the right track. We kind of said, if we're going to change our diet, we've got to do it before we're going to dinner parties and going to movie theaters and restaurants. So this might be a moment in time, and you gave it a name for me, that all of us, everybody, if you only get one thing from this, that this moment in time, as we're coming out of the pandemic, you can declare it a fresh start. And by saying it's a fresh start, we have a better chance of achieving the change we want. So talk to us a little bit about fresh starts. That was some of the most compelling stuff that you shared.
Well, first, thank you. I'm glad you found that compelling, and I love your story, and I'm so glad that the Fresh Start effect has helped you. This is research that was really motivated actually by a question, which is that I got, not a question that I just was walking around with. And it's always fun when the outside world kicks you a question that leads to a really productive area of inquiry. It was a talk I gave at Google to a bunch of their HR managers, they call them people analysts, about different tools and tactics that they could be using to improve productivity in the workplace, to get people to save more so they'd be more financially secure, to go to the gym so they'd be healthier. And the question was, is there some ideal moment to encourage change among our employees, or to, if we offer up programs, to put those programs in front of our employees? And I thought it was such a great question. And then the academic literature actually had very little to say. And so that was another life-changing moment. I started doing research with my former student, Heng-Chen Dai of UCLA's Anderson School, and Jason Reese, who's a senior fellow at Wharton, to try to understand what do moments look like that do provoke change. And the first thing, of course, that came to mind for us when we started trying to read and theorize and look for answers to this question was New Year's. I think probably that's coming to mind for lots of you before I even said it. New Year's resolutions are a widely studied phenomenon. About 40% of Americans make New Year's resolutions, and they're common in other cultures too. And what we learned is that in our work, that's just one of a series of moments that has this similar psychology, where it feels like at the beginning of a new year, or at the start of a new week, or a new month, or the celebration of a birthday or a holiday that can feel like a landmark, a few things happen. One is, we feel like we're at a turning point in our lives to some degree. We think about time not completely linearly, but rather as if we are characters in a book and there are chapters. And when something happens, I love it. It's so poetic, and it's so true, right? When you sort of think about the way you look back on time, you tell stories, you think about, the college years, or the years in Boston, or the years working at this company, or the years before you met a partner, and then the years with that partner. There are these chapter breaks that help us order time, organize our stories. And those chapter breaks turn out to be really momentous when it comes to making change. Because when we turn the page, when we feel like we're opening or starting a new chapter, we have the sense that the last chapter is actually further in the past. We feel like that was the old me and this is the new me. And it gives us optimism that we can make change that we wouldn't normally feel capable of. So, last year I failed to quit smoking, but that was the old me and the new me can do it. That's the kind of story we tell ourselves. And we're also more likely to step back and think big picture about our lives and engage in goal setting at these chapter breaks. So as I said, we found it's not just New Year's, but these other moments that have similar potency. New Year's is the biggest and it's socially sanctioned. Everybody's talking about it, but birthdays do this as well psychologically. Mondays really do have a big effect on our decisions. And we've seen this in data set after data set, when people visit the gym, when they set goals on a popular goal setting website online about everything from health to finances to education, when they search for the term diet. And we've also found that we can encourage goal setting and goal pursuit and savings more effectively if we attach these fresh start moments to the ping or to the call for action. So if we invite you to start saving after an upcoming birthday or at the start of spring, more people take us up on it than if we invite them to save at an equally distant future date and just don't label it as such. So we've seen that in various studies as well. And that's really the fresh start effect of these moments. They give us that extra motivation and we can take advantage of it to springboard ourselves towards change.
All right, I love that. Thank you for a great and thorough answer. And I'm going to parse out some of this. So for our folks, if you're thinking about launching a new habit, a new behavior in your life, or starting, as we would call it, a 66-day challenge, when you start matters. So this is a nuance. Like for the American audience, we think of the beginning of the week as Monday. And I know that in Europe, all the calendars start Sunday. So is it Monday or is it the first day of the week?
I love that you asked that question. There's actually some really interesting research that builds on ours where the experiment actually varied whether it showed people a calendar starting on a Sunday or a Monday, and demonstrated that depending on which kind of calendar people saw, their motivation peaked at different times. So there was more motivation and more goal pursuit on Sundays when people saw Sundays as the start of the week, and more on Mondays when they saw Mondays as the start of the week. So whatever day is meaningful to you as the start of the week is the one that you want to jump on as your fresh start.
That's good. So, and the other ones are, can you look out at the calendar and find something that feels momentous? Like we've tried to get a lot of people who want to wake up early. First question I ask is, are you on daylight savings time? And if they say yes, I'll say, well, the fall is a great time to do that, right? Because everybody is experiencing this time where we're resetting our clocks. Just keep getting up at the same time and you've lost no sleep and you're getting up an hour earlier on the clock. But that's like a moment in time, right? We switch times twice a year if you're in the daylight savings, the first day of summer, the first day of spring, the equinox, whatever that is. What about birthdays divisible by 5 or 10? Because we make a big deal out of those.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There's research showing that people search for meaning more around round number birthdays, and actually leading up to them can make big changes in their lives too, because, before you leave your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, you want to achieve X. So not only are fresh starts momentous, but around these really big boundaries, sometimes we hurry to try to achieve something as well. So
okay,
that's
a whole other thing you have to go research now. You've got fresh starts. You now need to do the finish strong.
Exactly. Right. Well, others have studied finish strong. Around the same time, we were studying fresh starts, and it was interesting to see how those things complement one another.
Right now, and if you can give the short version, I actually watched a little bit of the All-Star baseball game, but one of the phenomenons around fresh starts, like, it was hard to find a data set. Like, how do we get a big data set? Y'all use baseball. Is that even something we can try to tackle in 3 minutes or less?
I'll do my best.
Okay. I thought it was really interesting.
This actually, I love the study. I love that you asked about it. It's not my work. It's the work of my former student, Heng Chen. It was her dissertation that grew out of our work together on Fresh Start. She took this idea and she said, I wonder, and we've both been wondering about this, if all fresh starts are useful or if some can be harmful. And her suspicion was that when you've been performing really well, a fresh start might actually be harmful. Most of what we had been studying is people who were trying to jump on a new goal, and so fresh starts are good, but what if it's disruptive when you're doing well? So she looked at data from Major League Baseball players, and she looked at the particular fresh start of being traded to a new team in the middle of a season. And she wanted to have levels of fresh starts to compare to one another that were comparable, because just comparing players who were traded to those who aren't traded doesn't make sense. She looked actually at a really interesting wrinkle in the way trades happen. If you're traded across leagues, right, National League to American League or vice versa, it turns out your season to date statistics are all reset. So you get a real fresh start on performance tracking. But if you're traded within leagues, you move to a new city, but you don't actually reset your statistics. You know, your batting average stays with you and you just keep accumulating. So the question was, two players who basically look the same in terms of their season to date statistics, one of whom gets that reset with a trade and the other who doesn't, what happens to them? And what she found is that the reset is helpful to the player who's been having a poor season. So underperformers get a boost relative to someone who's traded and doesn't get a reset. Getting a reset helps them, but it's just the opposite for outstanding performances. If you've been really batting well all season and then you get traded and you have to start over in terms of your statistics relative to your peer who was doing just as well and got to hold on to their record, you tank. And so it's really interesting, I think, insight about fresh starts, that they're great when we need to begin again. But if things are going well, we need to look out for them and see how they can disrupt us and try to plan to avoid their negative effects.
There we go. So I was having an aha. I don't play poker very often, but every now and then I get a dad's group together. And because we're not professional poker players, at least 3 or 4 times a night, somebody will try to slide a card across the table. It'll flip over and we'll have to declare a redeal. If you had bad cards, you're happy. If you had good cards, you're like, no, let's play it, right? And so the phenomenon is, if you've got positive momentum, my takeaway is, do I really want to do another 66-day challenge to go from 80% to 90%? Because what I might actually do is lose my momentum instead of just rebuilding it. But if I'm struggling, which is when, that's a whole New Year's Eve. We're almost always trying to reset. So in that framework, it works. All right, I'm going to jump around.
That's a really nice comparison.
I'm going to test your knowledge of your book, because the other place, I'm jumping to page 140, but you talk about,
I don't know what's on that page.
No, yeah, you don't have this whole thing memorized. Research suggests that by tracking your exercise, your joke production, or even your virtuousness, you'll increase your chances of changing your behavior. Can you talk to us a little bit about, because I'm kind of an advocate, our group, we're always coming up with different ways to track. Why is tracking important?
Tracking is useful because if you aren't tracking, for one, you have no idea how things are going. So you can't celebrate your successes and you can't try to learn from what's not working if you don't have evidence or data to support what's happening when. So that's a really basic reason. The other reason I think tracking is important is because it draws attention to something, right? Just like goal setting, one of the reasons that goal setting is useful is it sort of creates more of a laser focus on the outcome you're trying to achieve. Tracking does that too, because now you're sort of drawn to see what's happening and try to understand it better. One of my favorite studies, which I actually don't describe in the book, but I'll mention now, is a study that was done of bonus material. It was a study that was done of this is of all things, water use and trying to get people to take shorter showers and use less water. And it was a really simple experiment. People got water use monitors, but some people's monitors showed them in real time how much water they were using and others didn't. And everyone was encouraged to cut back and to try to be environmentally conscious. But there was a huge effect of literally seeing that water use accumulate in real time in the shower. People hopped out much faster. And I think it's the same kind of attentional mechanism that often drives the usefulness of tracking, like if you're wearing a Fitbit or tracking your sleep or whatever choices you're making to track something.
I can be so addicted to it. Like, I like to track my walks and all of that. And there's that what the hell effect, right? Where if you break the chain, you can just it starts with just one chip and then you eat the whole plate of nachos. Like, I've already done a little bad. I might as well use this cheat day. But there are times like if I didn't get credit for the walk, it's like, it's such a letdown for me. So maybe that's more about me than the process, but I get great
I think
satisfaction
you're,
in not breaking the chain. You know, the Jerry Seinfeld story that you shared, that we have in ours as well. We share that story, our two
yeah,
books.
it's a classic story. I love that story. Yes. Are you who I stole that from originally?
No,
But
no,
it's a really nice example.
I traced it back to there's a website called Lifehacker, and I traced it back to an engineer that supposedly met Jerry Seinfeld backstage and wrote about it online. And then that became its own
Maybe
thing.
that's who I cite too. I don't remember.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
is a popular example, but a good one. I think it's a really nice illustration of the importance of trying to keep those streaks going. Yes, but I do think you're pointing to a really important risk associated with tracking. And by the way, I should say my dad during the COVID pandemic era, if you'll call it that, got into wearables because I was trying to make sure that he was walking regularly. So I convinced him to start wearing them. And he is obsessed with this. And he's been swimming this summer with my son and not getting step credit. And he's like, it doesn't count. It's not exercise. I haven't exercised today. So anyway, it's interesting. That's a downside of goals as well, is because we're so laser focused on what's measured instead of the big picture, the global, it can be a risk. And there's some really wonderful research on that.
Cool. All right. I've got a couple more things before we open it up. The idea of a mulligan. So I'll just share like really quickly. If you don't play golf, the idea of a mulligan is like, because I definitely need them. If your golf is hard enough, if you don't have any do-overs. And so for casual golfers, if you hit one off into the woods on your very first swing, it's customary that you might get 1 or 2 mulligans for the round. And that's just basically a do-over. Now, when I read your research, and I'll ask you to go into a little bit about the impact of having a mulligan in your back pocket, our group, we're pretty hardcore. And so a lot of times when people are on their 66-day streak, if they miss a day, they just restart the clock. And so I asked my team the question, maybe we have to do a control group going forward where we have one group that's we're going to be, the restart group. If you miss a day, just start over, start your streak. Or maybe we'll give people, it's 10 weeks. Why don't we give them 3 mulligans, right? Or something like that. And they get a little grace to themselves. So just know that you may change the whole way we do things because of this, but talk to us a little bit about why mulligans matter and why it's not cheating and might actually be a good thing.
Yeah, this is great. I'm so glad you brought this up. And this is some of my favorite research that I get to feature in the book. And I should say it's not my work. It's work by my amazing colleague, Marissa Sharif at Wharton and Suzanne Shu at Cornell. And they had this insight based on Marissa's own desire to...
Pause. I just want to, I know that you're a researcher and this is really important, but I want to acknowledge that you, throughout the book, you methodically acknowledge the source for all of your material and your peers. And not everybody in the self-help, I know you don't think of yourself as a self-help author, but not everybody in this space does this. So I just want to pause and acknowledge you. You always acknowledge when your peers and your partners have been a part of the journey. So go back, your 2 partners on this journey actually did this research. I just think that's really classy, and I love that about you.
Oh, thank you. I'm blushing, and I appreciate that. And, it's important to me to make sure that I'm not taking credit for the brilliant work of others, but instead getting to hold them up and make sure they get even more, kudos for their fabulous work. So anyway, I appreciate the kind words. So Marissa and Suzanne did this wonderful work, and it was based on Marissa's insight in her own life. It was really a life hack of her own. She wanted to run every day of the week. That was her goal. It made her feel healthier and less stressed out, like so many of us get that out of exercise. And she sometimes couldn't get to the gym or lace up her shoes. She found it wasn't always possible. Things got in the way. And she had seen that it was often really demotivating when she'd miss a day. She was worried about the hell effect. She was familiar with it from being a behavioral scientist. You miss a day or 2, you might say, like, I give up this whole thing of exercising regularly. It's just too much. It's not working for me. She was worried about that. She was also worried about setting her goal or her sights on too low of an objective, because we know that To set the best goals, they should be tough, reachable, but really tough. You want to be pushing yourself. So she said, I'm just going to try for 5 days a week. She thought she might not do as much as she could. So she came up with for herself a solution. This was the mulligan solution. She actually calls it an emergency reserve. So the goal is she gets up to 2 emergency reserves for her runs per week, and she tries really hard not to take them. They're really for emergencies. So if some emergency comes up, she can still call herself on track to take it, but she doesn't allow herself to do it regularly. And she said most weeks she doesn't use any because she thinks of it that way, not as sort of a pass, but a true emergency out. She thought this was working so well for her, she should study it. And in some of her dissertation work, she did really clever randomized control trials with different work tasks and goals that were assigned, and also with exercise. So all different walks of life, from productivity hacks to trying to get to the gym regularly. And she would compare what happened when she just gave people a goal of doing something 5 days a week versus a tougher goal of 7 days a week versus the goal of 7 days a week, but with 2 emergency reserves or mulligans. And what she found time and again is that the best performing group kind of by far was that one that was, the tough goal, 7 days, but with 2 emergency reserves. And interestingly, right, objectively, it's exactly the same as a 5 day a week goal.
Right.
But people are trying not to only end up at 5. They're not satisficing. They're not saying, okay, I've done enough. They keep stretching themselves towards that 7, but they don't give up on themselves if they have a miss, which is what sometimes happens when the goal is 7 days a week. So she found this beautiful sweet spot. And I do think it's a really creative insight that we need to give ourselves a little bit of padding. It shouldn't be so much padding that we just luxuriate and relax and let ourselves off the hook on doing tough things, but it should be enough that when true things get in the way, we really can't get around, we don't abandon our goals.
All right, I love that. So what I love that you equated the 2 as, it's 5. Is it 7 with 2 in reserve, or is it 5? It's the same thing, but I think of all the times that people, like on a hardcore diet, they have a cheat day, and that just gives them a place to fail without failing. And one of our first books that we wrote together, one of the opening lines was about aiming high. And the reason we always aim high is because inevitably we fall short. And if you truly wanted to achieve something, so there's a lot of wisdom in that. And all I can say is I'm going to start playing with it, and I'll start playing with it with our group. And if we can document it properly with the help of Kaylin and our team, maybe we'll circle back and share some data with you. But I like the idea of a limited reserve so that we have some grace, because if last year taught us anything, is that life is always going to be throwing you curveballs. And perfection's way overrated. We need to make consistent progress. And if we can net 5, that's going to be better than striving for 7 and giving up after 6 weeks. So anyway, I love that you definitely changed a lot of my paradigm around that, and it also rang true. So that was very cool. I have one more, and then we've got some great questions. And I'm going to ask you, Katy, only because we've got a little bit of audio. Try see if you can just slow down a little bit on this last one, and we'll make sure that your audio quality is coming through. Maybe that'll help. I don't know.
I'll have to do that.
There we go. Yeah, maybe. The last one, you talk about the No Club, and so much about our book. If to say yes to something, you actually have to say no. And I know the context around this was different, but my takeaway, and I'll let you tell the story, was having a peer group to support us will help us reinforce why we chose on this journey, and help us maybe through examples, whatever, navigate when we should be doing something different, or how we can keep our commitments that we've made to ourselves, even when the going gets tough. But the fact that it was a no club, right? And that's teaching people to say no is one of the most powerful tools you can give them in order to truly say yes. So give us a little bit about that. That was just one of those sections. I read it out loud to my wife, and I was like, oh, I love this idea of a no club. It's also because it was about women in the workplace.
Yeah, and I should actually note that the person who inspired this no club, in the spirit of credit, this is based on research by Linda Babcock at Carnegie Mellon and colleagues, and they actually are writing a book about this very topic. The whole book focused on no club. So for everybody who likes this idea, just So, I don't know if you can pre-order it yet, but hopefully soon. So the research that they had done was research that women take on many more of the non-promotable tasks, that's the terminology they use, at work than men. And non-promotable tasks means the kinds of things that need to get done, but that you won't get rewarded for in the long run, like planning the holiday party for your group, or taking notes in a meeting, right? Somebody needs to do this stuff. It's important to the functioning of an organization, but it doesn't tend to be rewarded. Or maybe sitting on committees. There are all sorts of things like this. And women, it turns out in study after study, are more likely to say yes when they're asked to do those kinds of things that won't be rewarding for their career than men. And the result is they end up doing a bunch of stuff that doesn't advance them. So maybe this is sort of the reason we see, for instance, continued inequality in wages at work. Obviously, there are many contributing factors, but this could be part of it. That's their hypothesis. What Linda described after this research that her peers had done is they formed a no club, a club of women at a similar to support one another. Whenever they got an ask to do something that was outside of their basic job description, to try to figure out and decide which of these are the things to say to and which ones we should sometimes say no to, and to help each other figure out how to navigate that, because it seems to be hard for women to say those no's. I thought, brilliant idea, emulate. I love it. And I went to my colleagues at NYU and Columbia who are at a similar career stage, we formed one, and it's been life-changing. And as you said, for all these reasons, it does help me say no more often so that I can say yes to the things that I really value the most. But actually, in addition to some of the things I expected to get out of it, which I did in boatloads, I got the benefit of stronger friendships with these amazing women. I got the benefit of seeing their insights applied to the problems I was facing, and that wisdom that they gave me, it was generously. So those things were fabulous, even more fabulous than expected. But there was an extra added benefit, and this is one of the reasons I write about this in the book, that I didn't anticipate, which was that when I was asked my own input on challenges they faced, I also gained something unexpected. I realized I often could actually solve their problems myself. Like, they asked me questions I might have struggled had I faced it on my own, but when they put it to me, I thought, oh, actually I can figure this out. And I would find solutions that were creative, and it boosted my confidence that I could tackle similar problems even without the No Club. And sometimes I don't even have to go to the No Club. In my own career, I came up with insights I might not have that were later useful to me. And once I said something to someone or gave them advice, I felt like a hypocrite if I didn't take it myself. So I achieved more, not only because of the social support I gained and the wisdom from the other members of my No Club, but also from that advice giving exercise, I think. And then there's data to back up my hypothesis, which is research by Lauren Eskris Winkler of the Kellogg School at Northwestern, shows that when we give advice, when someone asks us for our opinion on something, it actually helps us achieve more for all the reasons I just described. It boosts our self-confidence. Somebody thinks I know what I'm talking about, causes us to dredge up insights about how to solve this problem that we might not have thought through if we were just trying to solve it ourselves. But for someone else, we go the extra mile, and then we feel like a hypocrite if we don't do the same thing we tell someone else to do.
Well, there's so much that's wrapped up in there. Like, I wrote in my margins and asked the question, how good of a manager and parent was I being when I failed to ask the question and instead go into providing answers, right? When I give advice, you're tacitly telling someone that you don't believe they can figure it out. That was what I was like, oh. So when I tell my children how to do something versus asking, how do you think you should do this? I'm not building their confidence. And I thought it was a very big aha, because we focus a lot on the power of great questions. And leadership often is positioned in our group about asking the best questions so a person can find their answers. Because we've always said people, they'll do what you say because you said it if there's an authority. But most people will most often they'll do it because they agreed with you. And if you just start with what they've already agreed to because it was their answer, you've got a much better chance. So it lined up with a lot of my real world, and you just gave science behind it. So asking questions is really powerful, and starting there. And when we give advice, we're more likely to follow that advice. So it's like practice what you preach, right? We don't want to be hypocrites in our own world. So, all right.
I
So
love
I've
all
got,
the ways that you digested that.
oh, I'm just parsing it out and trying to translate it into one thing language as well. We've got some questions here, and I'm going to try to get through a few of these because we're about 40 minutes into it, and I want to give people, I mean, everybody time to go to bathroom before they go to their next Zoom meeting at the top of the hour. But we've got a question from Michelle. She's asking a question, and this is central to us. I've often wondered if we underestimate the number of areas we can change in our lives at one time. Most people suggest we can only change one at a time. Do you have thoughts on this? So when you think about behavior change, is there a limit to how much of this we can be doing at one time?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And, research does suggest we can overdo it. And specifically, there's a study by Steven Spiller at UCLA looking at when people make plans around how they'll achieve their goals, which is a really important part of goal success. You can't just have that sort of big goal off in the distance. You have to break it down, figure out, where will I do it? When will I do it? How will I do it on a sort of weekly basis? Map that all out to get there. What Stephen found is if people did that kind of mapping and planning for multiple goals, they actually did worse on goal achievement. Whereas if they do it for a single goal, planning helps. And the rationale and the finding is that the reason that it's harmful to do this for multiple goals is people became demotivated when they saw how many different steps they have to take for all these different goals. It's overwhelming, and it reduces their motivation and their success rates. So I think that's a big part of why we're told to focus on one thing at a time. The caveat I'll add, though, which I think is maybe related to what you're saying, which is, do I really have to do one thing at a time? I think if we focus and plan for one thing at a time, that is ideal. But that doesn't mean that in the background that you can't continue to support a goal you've already made plans for in the past. Right. So in the course of a year, you could imagine having 12 different goals. And by the end of the year, maybe you're working on all of them. But each month you build the plan for how you'll achieve. And then you focus on one at a time, but you keep executing, right? Because at some point it can go on autopilot and feel more like a habit and less like an active planning and concentration process. So by month 2, hopefully you're still working on the first goal. It's just that no longer is a focus. That's no longer where you're putting your planning energy. And now you're planning for goal 2. So I think that's one way we could do more than one thing at once.
That's great. That lines up. We usually advise people, especially with behavior change, just, make your stand around the thing that's most important. And once you feel like you've got it established, you can kind of go into maintenance mode. And then you can start launching other things. So kind of stagger your launches. Maintaining something is not nearly as difficult as launching something and all of the behaviors that come with it. So I love that answer. I'm going to go to Victor. Wow. Okay. So can we apply your change principles like bundling to overcome implicit bias and reach long-lasting effects?
Oh, wow. Such a great question. And by the way, I don't write almost all. I write about it a little bit, but I don't write much about race and gender bias in the book, although that is actually a topic I've studied a lot. I focused more on other kinds of goals here. Part of the reason that I don't touch on it as deeply is because I do think the change principles are different in that space. When we're trying to change our attitudes and our actions in that arena, it's less about forgetting and self-control and habit and more, I have found, unfortunately, frankly, I think it's harder. But I think it's also that the organizations we build and the structures we build are much more important. So let me give you an example. We did one study where we really built all the best principles into an educational program designed to bust bias, right? Taught people about implicit bias. They would take an implicit bias test. We taught them all of the we teach in business schools, sort of the top hits about why stereotypes are formed, where are the situations where bias is most likely to be a problem, how can you try to counter it with your actions And for this training, we randomly assigned about 3,000 people to either get that training program or a training on a completely unrelated topic that didn't have to do with implicit bias. And then we did pretty rigorous measurement. Did it have any effect on attitudes? Did it have any effect on behaviors? We measured for months. And what we found is that sort of this, I'll call it state of the art. I mean, it was an online program, so it wasn't like we were immersing people for weeks in it, but we found that it changed attitudes, had almost no impact on behavior, essentially none. The only behaviors that changed were that women and minorities who went through the program ended up basically looking out for themselves more, trying to seek out more mentors who resembled them demographically after the training. And the goal had not been to scare women and minorities, but rather to change the attitudes of others and change the behaviors of others so that women and minorities would thrive to a greater degree. That work and other work has made me increasingly pessimistic about sort of trying to use the tools, sort of educational tools or tools like temptation bundling, which is in a sense sort of like a mind trick to try to tackle this. And I've become increasingly optimistic about true structural changes. I'll tell you two briefly that seem to work, and you'll get a sense of what I mean by structure, not training or tricks. One thing we found that can be really helpful is when people are hiring, if they hire in sets rather than singletons. So if you're thinking about, I have a team to fill and there's 10 people on the team and we probably need 5 new people this year, you could either hire them one at a time over the course of 5 months, or you could hire a set of 5 people all at once. And what our research suggests is you will end up hiring a much more diverse group if you hire 5 people at once. And the reason is that you actually focus on diversity. When you hire a group of people, you notice if they all look the same, if they all have the same background, and that sets off alarm bells, because most of us value diversity, recognize that it increases creativity and outputs. And so you'll work towards that goal. It's more salient. But when you hire one at a time, you don't even notice that each of them, because they're evaluated in isolation, and you can't notice that they're not adding the diversity nearly as easily. You're focusing narrowly. So that's the kind of thing that seems to work more. Or saying, I won't require people to raise their hands. If they want a promotion, I'll put everyone up for promotion by default. And then you can opt out if you really don't want to be considered. That's another kind of policy change that seems to have really big benefits for women and minorities who are a little less likely to raise their hands out of apprehension. And so I think those are the kinds of solutions we should be looking to, more than coaching the individual on how to achieve more, which is the focus of this book. So that was a long answer, but it's a topic near and dear to my heart. So thanks for giving me the chance to talk about it.
No, it's a big one. It's a big one in our time right now. And I do think there's so much that gets tied up in getting people to change. Like when we choose to change our behaviors is one thing, getting someone else to change their perspective is another. I think that people have to choose to change their perspective. And even like I've been on a journey of understanding my own privilege and all of those things. And it takes a lot of work over time to undo a lot of habits of thought. And so I just want to acknowledge that even for those that are trying, it can be a difficult journey. And I just, the more insights we have into how that works, the better we'll all be. I've got another question. So thank you, Victor, for that question. Nicole asked, how do you sustain good habits when you have that slip up that sends you spiraling? So that might lead us right back to the mulligan discussion, but is there anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, it's such a wonderful question. So the mulligan, you're right. Mulligans are a perfect answer, and emergency reserves. I hope that will be helpful. I think another thing to note that can be useful in thinking about this is that change is a journey, and the barriers that we're up against can change as we go through that journey. And I think when we hit a roadblock, it's also often useful to use that as a trigger to look up and think about, have the barriers changed, and have the solutions that I've been using, say your initial barriers to getting started problem, which is one of the things I write about it. And then you need to find a fresh start to motivate yourself. And then you fall off the wagon. Things aren't going so well. It's a good moment to look up and say, okay, well, I found the motivation to begin. So maybe that's not my problem at this point. Maybe it's a different challenge and you need a different kind of solution. So maybe you're not enjoying the pursuit of the change anymore. Maybe you've lost your confidence for some reason, maybe because of the slip up. And then science offers different solutions that might help bridge that gap for you. And so I think when we have a slip up, in addition to trying to use emergency reserves or mulligans so that you'll take it less seriously, it won't disrupt your flow, another thing you can do is try to look to new tactics and figure out, do you have a different barrier that's obstructing your progress that you might want to solve for in a new way after this, I'll say, step back.
Yeah, it was Gretchen Rubin was the author I was failing to remember. Maybe one of the reasons I appreciate how well you cite all of these sources is you can spin off the names, and I can't even do my favorite authors sometimes. She also, when I was interviewing her, she shared that restarting a habit after completely, like a complete do-over, right, from that can often be harder because the novelty of it isn't there. Like sometimes the novelty of starting something new is a little bit of a tailwind. I don't know if that lines up with your experience or not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm trying to think of the research literature on habits and if I've seen studies that support that.
I'm putting you on the spot there. So if you don't have the answer, that'll be the one time in an hour that you didn't have the answer.
Showing that. Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know of any evidence for that, but I can see why it would potentially be true. Certainly, one of the things that I write about in the book and that I have studied and others have studied is the importance of enjoyment when we're pursuing goals. Now I'm going to cite another couple of authors. Ayelet Fishbach and Caitlin Woolley have done this really fabulous work. They're from UChicago and Cornell, showing most of us think we should pursue goals in the way that we see as most effective, but it's actually often better to look for the most fun way because you won't quit. I sort of think that Gretchen Rubin insight aligns with that. And the first time you try to start a habit, it's novel, it's fun. And so maybe you get more enjoyment and satisfaction. But when that novelty wears off the second time around, you can see how instant gratification you were getting from this new pursuit is going to be lessened, and therefore it's going to be more of an uphill battle. So maybe that's the best aligned work to support that argument.
I think you get more social encouragement the first time. When you announce on Facebook, I'm starting my running program or whatever that is, you don't tend to announce it the second time. I fell off the wagon while I was on vacation and I'm restarting my diet, right? And so I guess definitely that lines up, and you also don't get as much the impact of having your friends behind you and rooting for you. I've got about 6 more questions. I'm going to apologize to Jane, Scott, Desi, and I'm going to go straight to, I guess Scott had 2. But when you think about behavior change, is there a strategy that you choose for just you, Katy Milkman, about what behavior should I choose to change next? How do you, because like on the journey to being the best version of ourselves, if we're really being honest and looking in the mirror, there's lots that we could all work on. Right? When you ask the question, like, how do you prioritize what's next? What's the next journey I'm going to go on?
Oh, I really, really love that question. It's a great question of how to pick kind of change pursuing it. It's funny because I've been doing, as you said, how many podcasts have I done for the last 2 months? I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. I've been asked, is it happier? Should I really change? But I don't think anyone has asked me, how do I prioritize what is most in need of changing? In my own life, I think the way I prioritize is based on where I see if I'll get the most satisfaction. I know some people who do it based on sort of the low-hanging fruit, where can I make the biggest dent with a little bit of effort? And I think that's another reasonable heuristic. But in my case, I tend to try to focus on a goal where it feels like if I can nail it, the impact will be largest. And I think that's like a theme across my academic pursuits as well as impact matters a lot to me. And so that's how I choose my goals. But I don't know of any research that says there's a best way. And it's probably more about.
I took you off the hook. I said in your life. So it sounds like you use Pareto's principle, right? You're using the principle of the thing that would have the biggest impact towards where you want to go. And that's kind of where we direct people in the absence of a better metric. I would say off the top of my head, our values, right, hopefully are driving our goals, and therefore all of that lines up. But I could see choosing something that was more dear to my values, even if the outcomes might be less muted. But I think your criteria, Scott, is your own, but those are two that we will proffer up from our personal lives. I try to get both of those lined up personally. I start with the values and then ask your question, like, what would be most impactful? And I go from there. So Katy, we're at the end of our time. I promised to let people out 5 minutes early, and almost everybody hung with us. So thank you guys for hanging with us. I hope you got as much value as I did. Katy, thanks again for sharing your gifts with the world. I hate that my camera's backwards. Do you see this backwards?
Actually, I see it forwards.
Oh, good. It's going backwards for
thing.
me. So it's like, I'm like, oh. So everybody go out and buy a copy of How to Change. If you're like me, you'll end up with about 50 or 60 pages of notes that you can go back and access. It's very accessible. And the opening story we didn't even get to about Andre Agassi, which is about how you adapt models to yourself, is great. And we could go to a whole other webinar. But Katy, thank you for lending your time to us. I hope you don't have to go gargle salt water after this. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. Hang around and we'll chat after we close down the webinar. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.